I just want to acknowledge that this topic is quite personal and sensitive. So I want to emphasize that this is about psychoeducation, not a replacement for therapy. So please take what feels relevant and helpful for you and leave the rest. You're also welcome to engage in this in whatever feels safest and most comfortable for you. So if you need to take breaks or if you just want to listen in for a small portion of it, that's completely fine. And if at any point you're feeling distressed, please reach out to these supports that are included here. So we've got the Butterfly Foundation and Lifeline. The goal of today is really to improve understanding about binge eating, reduce the shame around it, and give you some practical tools. And I'll also talk a little bit about referral pathways closer to the end of the webinar. Okay, so I want to start off with what binge eating disorder actually is. Binge eating disorder, or BED for short, involves eating a large amount of food in a discrete period of time. And often it's to the point of feeling physical discomfort or even pain. There's also a, a loss of control during eating, that sense of I can't stop. And these binges can happen quite regularly. And there's often a lot of shame, guilt, and distress associated with it. Another really important point is that binge eating disorder doesn't involve compensatory behaviors afterwards. So, for example, purging. So when binging is followed by purging, that actually falls under a different type of eating disorder called bulimia nervosa. We won't be getting too much into bulimia, but I just want to make that distinction clear because they do often get confused for one another or kind of combined into the one. I also want to emphasize that binge eating is not the same as overeating. Overeating is something that most people will do anyway from time to time. So, for example, if you're at a birthday party or Christmas dinner, or if you're catching up with friends and the food's really good, but it doesn't involve that same loss of control or shame afterwards. I also just wanted to take a moment and put binge eating disorder into context. So, over 1 million Australians are currently impacted by eating disorders. Of those 1 million, binge eating disorder is actually the most common eating disorder. A lot of people are actually quite surprised to hear the statistics because the media often makes it seem like eating disorders only impact people living in smaller bodies, um, when in reality, it can actually impact anyone, regardless of weight, age, gender, or background. Um, and importantly, it is treatable with psychological and dietetic support. There's a lot of myths that can keep people stuck, and actually creates a lot of stigma associated with binge eating. One of them is that binge eating disorder is a willpower problem. Binge eating is a real recognized eating disorder. It's not a lack of discipline. Another myth is that I don't look sick enough. Eating disorders don't have a certain look. People of any body shape or size can be impacted by binge eating disorder or any eating disorder for that case. Another myth is that I should just try harder. This is a really common one, especially when it comes to binge eating, one that we see a lot in the media. But again, it's not about trying harder. If it were, the statistics would look very different and people wouldn't be as strongly impacted by it. Um, and finally, I'll fix it when life calms down, which actually applies for binge eating, but also just mental health in general. The reality is that life often doesn't fully calm down. Things can pop up constantly, and waiting can actually keep us stuck for years. And research does show that early support makes a huge difference. I want you to take a quick moment just to reflect on what you feel keeps the cycle going for you or someone that you know in your life. Is it restriction, stress, big emotions, having really poor sleep and feeling very exhausted? Is it shame, guilt, and disgust? Or is it poor body image? Or is it a mix of a couple of these factors or all of them? For most people, it's not just the one. It's usually multiple or all of these. So restriction increases our biological drive to binge. Stress, trauma, emotions um, increase our need to cope. And poor sleep reduces our capacity to regulate ourselves, and shame really keeps us stuck in the binge cycle. And these all feed into that binge cycle, which I'll talk about now. So the cycle, I'm going to break down the cycle across multiple slides just so it's a little bit easier to understand. So the cycle starts with vulnerability factors. So things like chronic stress, feeling overwhelmed by things happening in life, having poor sleep or chronic sleep deprivation, dieting, restriction, and for some people, trauma. These factors themselves don't actually cause the binges on their own, but they often deplete our emotional resources. So we're already starting from a place where coping is difficult. And then something happens, which acts as a trigger. This could be a stressful conversation with someone at work, or feeling lonely, or just a very difficult thought or emotion, or even just hunger and exhaustion. Sometimes it's a single obvious trigger. Other times it can be a slow build-up over the day that's led to the trigger. Either way, it creates discomfort and distress. And that brings us to the urge itself. And this part's really important because the urge isn't just about food or hunger. It's often about coping with that distress or discomfort from the trigger or the triggers. So at this point, your brain just wants to avoid or distract or find some kind of comfort. So that might look like, I just want to feel better. I don't want to deal with this right now. And so the urge is really a drive for that relief or escape. Um, and so it makes sense why people will binge because it is a behavior that works in the short term. And so once the binge happens, people might experience feeling relief or distraction, or even some numbness from what they were trying to cope with. But that relief is often temporary. And so that takes us to the next part of the cycle. There's a shift into guilt, shame, self-criticism. Some thoughts might be, what's wrong with me? I'm disgusting. I have no self-control. I'll never get better. And this is the part of the cycle that can be really difficult to sit with and really powerful in keeping the cycle going. And oftentimes, the response to those feelings um, is to compensate for the food that was consumed. So that might sound like I'll be good tomorrow, or I won't eat breakfast, or I need to make up for this binge. But then again, it kind of leads back into this restriction, which again increases our vulnerability. And so the cycle continues. The key thing to take from this is that the binge isn't random. The urge is about coping with distress, and the cycle is maintained by shame and restriction. So breaking the cycle really isn't about willpower, it's about addressing the factors that are maintaining it. I want to put this cycle into some context. So I'm going to use Sally, who is a made-up person, um, just to help with understanding the cycle. So Sally's 41 years old. She's a primary school teacher. She works 4 days a week and lives with her husband and their two children, aged 6 and 8. Her husband works really long hours from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., Monday to Friday. So Sally ends up having to manage most of the before and after school routines. So that includes things like drop-offs, pickups, breakfast, and sometimes dinner and homework. By the end of the day, she often feels physically exhausted, completely emotionally drained, and has very little time for herself. Her only time off is on the weekends. Um, but because she's a parent, even then, a lot of her time is spent either doing things for the children or being with the children and her husband. She struggles to make time for herself, and any time she gets with her husband on the weekend is also taken up by chores or errands. Sally's been struggling with binge eating for several years, and she's often telling herself during the day that she'll be good, but finds herself binging in the evenings after work once the kids are in bed and once her husband's asleep. On weekends, she has noticed she's less likely to binge because her family's there, but weeknights are really difficult for her. So if we were to map out Sally's binge cycle, it might look a little bit like this. So her vulnerability factors include skipping lunch due to her busy teaching schedule. She has a lot of stress and high emotional workload from work and parenting. She's got limited time for herself and has constant food thoughts, or thoughts just about needing to be better or be more strict the next day. Sally's triggers happen once the kids are in bed and her husband's also gone to bed for his early start. That's when the house is quiet, she's feeling overwhelmed, alone, and just mentally done. She notices the urge to binge, and since she's feeling absolutely exhausted and just emotionally depleted, she just wants an escape. So she's also got the biological drive to binge as well because she skipped her lunch and hasn't really had much since breakfast. And so she has a binge, which gives her temporary relief and distraction. Um, but after a while, she notices thoughts like, I've ruined the day, I've got no self-control, which kind of feeds into that guilt and shame. And so she decides to skip breakfast the next day to compensate for the binge, which just keeps that cycle going. So, how can we break the cycle? One of the most evidence-based strategies is to have regular and adequate eating. Regular basically means eating after every 3 to 4 hours, and usually this would look like having breakfast, um, morning snack, lunch, afternoon tea, dinner, and then uh, an evening snack. The meals and snacks would also have to be an adequate portion. And that by that, what we mean is having enough food that meets your nutritional needs. So it needs to be fueling your body and your mind. Eating regularly and adequately is usually the first step, and it really helps to reduce that biological drive to binge. So this would actually help address one of the vulnerability factors that I mentioned before. And often the effect of it is very, very immediate. So since the binging is often a way to cope, we'd also need to explore alternative, more adaptive ways of coping. So this could look like urge surfing, which I'll explain a bit more in detail. Grounding ourselves in the present moment, learning to build our capacity to sit with uncomfortable emotions, and also learning to feel a bit more comfortable reaching out for support from family or friends, or just distraction from friends and family. Again, the goal isn't to remove the urge itself. That's not something that we have control over, but it's about responding to it a little bit differently, with strategies that are helpful in short and long term. Um, a big part of treatment for binge eating disorder and just breaking the cycle is addressing the shame, and working on creating a better relationship with food and your body. And since the instinct is usually to restrict, punish, or start over after a binge, The goal is actually to do the complete opposite and just sit with that discomfort. So that would look like eating your next planned meal regardless of a binge, not restricting and sitting with that discomfort of eating even though you had a binge, and responding with self-compassion. And over time, unpacking shame and the maladaptive core beliefs that sit underneath the surface of the binge eating. Um, and I'm bringing Sally back to help illustrate how this might look. Um, so, with psychological and dietetic support, Sally would begin working on eating more regularly, even if it feels uncomfortable or counterintuitive at first. So, this could look like packing a really simple lunch that she takes consistently to work because she is a mum and she's very busy with very limited time for herself. It would have to be something that's quite easy to whip up last minute as well. Um, because she's busy, she's forgetting to eat. It would also look like setting reminders on her phone to eat during her busy days at work. Um, and then introducing an afternoon snack would also be a potential option because then that way she's had a little bit of food before she picks up her kids from school. Over time, her hunger becomes a bit more stable. Her evening urges would start reducing in intensity, and she'd feel less out of control around food. In terms of emotional regulation, Sally would start to recognize that her binging is the only time she really gets a break and an escape. So instead of removing it completely, therapy might focus on adding new ways to cope. So, for example, urge surfing, which I'll get to next, um, which looks like taking a 10 to 15 minute pause before binging, having a transition routine, so allowing herself to just grab a tea, sit down, listen to some music, anything that helps calm her nervous system. And then also learning what to identify what she actually needs, whether that's rest, comfort, or some space. Okay. And since Sally's instinct is to restrict and start again after a binge, in therapy, she'd also learn to repair that relationship with food and the relationship she has with her own body. So she'd be eating her next planned meal even after the binge, responding with self-compassion, and rather than criticizing herself, it would be more about reflecting on what led up to that binge. So really shifting the focus from I failed or I have no self-control to I was exhausted today and I didn't eat enough food all day. No wonder the urge was so strong. Other body image work might also include having Sally tune into her body functions and allowing her to live the life that she wants and be with her loved ones rather than focusing on its appearance. So, an example could be shifting her focus from the way her arms look to having her notice my arms let me embrace or hug the people that I really care about in my life. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about urge surfing. I've mentioned it a few times now. So it's a strategy that's recommended for clients who experience urges to binge. Sometimes it's called delaying the urge, but I'm just going to stick with urge surfing. You're welcome to use this strategy for yourself if you want to. It's going to be on the handout that's available. It should be available to download on Eventbrite, so you can always come back to it in your own time. When an urge shows up, it can feel like it's really intense and that it's going to stick around forever. But we know that urges always have a peak and they do eventually dissipate. And so I included this graph. I've included the source down below as well if you wanted to take a look at the other information alongside that graph. How it works is you've got the trigger, the urge rises, it peaks eventually. This is usually where people will binge. But again, the urge does weaken over time, even if it feels like it won't. Just knowing this on its own can sometimes help sitting with that urge as well. So, one strategy is urge surfing or delaying the urge. So, when the urge shows up, reminding yourself that it will not last forever. So, you might want to say to yourself, I'm noticing the urge to binge. I'm going to wait 10 minutes. During that time, focusing on some of the things we can focus on is changing your environment. So if you notice your binge is stronger when you're closer to the kitchen or you're sitting in front of the TV in your living room, maybe moving to a different part in your house, whether it's your bedroom, backyard, or even going for a very short walk around the block. Um, you can also use those 10 minutes to talk to someone, whether that's in person, over text, call, whatever feels right for you. There is never any pressure to discuss binge eating or any mental health concerns with the person that you're calling. You can also just call someone as a distraction if that feels like a safer option for you. And other things you might want to do in those 10 minutes is just listen to music, watch a comfort TV show, take a bath, whatever feels right. And then once the 10 minutes are up, checking in with yourself. And this is when you decide. So if you still want to binge or if you want to wait another 10 minutes. But we can be really flexible with that time. It doesn't have to be waiting another 10 minutes. It could be wait another 5 minutes and do another check-in. If you do decide to binge after the 10 minutes, please remember that you've still managed to delay it by 10 minutes. So something that's felt automatic and felt like it's outside of your control is now something that you've been able to delay, which is massive. And we're not aiming for perfection. We want progress and consistency. So coming back to Sally, when she notices the urge to binge at night, she starts urge surfing. So for Sally, she's decided to delay her binge by 10 minutes. That's what she feels most comfortable with. She finds it helpful to tell herself out loud, I'm noticing the urge to binge. I don't have to act on it straight away. And that kind of gives her a bit of time and choice. And so she sets herself the 10-minute timer on her phone. In those 10 minutes, Sally's decided she's going to leave the kitchen where she usually binges, and she's actually going to go either into her lounge area where she usually reads her books, or during warm days, she's going to go into her backyard, do her grounding exercises and her box breathing to regulate herself. If she's feeling lonely and she's noticing that's one of her main triggers for that binge, she's actually going to spend some time being with her husband or calling her mum as distraction. And Sally's aware that there is no pressure for her to talk about her urge to binge or her mental health in those conversations. When the 10 minutes are up, that's when she's going to decide. And no matter what she ends up doing, so whether that's waiting another 10 minutes or binging, she is going to be self-compassionate. She's also going to make a note on her phone with the date, time, and what happened, so whether or not she binged. And she's also going to make a note with how long she delayed the binge for. The purpose behind keeping a record of what's happened is to help Sally notice that previously the urge felt automatic and immediate. And now she's able to see that there's a pause. Even if she still binges, she's noticing that it's happening much later. It's feeling less intense and she feels like she's more in control, which is progress. If this is something you or someone you know is struggling with, you don't have to manage it alone. You can talk to your GP. They'll ask some questions around just your general well-being. They'll ask questions about your eating, your body image, exercise, if you're purging or not. And based on the answers that you provide, they can actually provide you with an eating disorder management plan, or EDMP for short. So, uh, an eating disorder plan is different to mental health care plans. I'll just talk about mental health care plans first, really quickly. So, anyone can have access to mental health care plan if they go to their GP and discuss concerns that they're having about their mental health. And that usually means that 10 sessions will be covered by Medicare, or you'll receive a rebate for those 10 sessions. But with eating disorder plans, you actually have access to 40 sessions within a 12-month period. Um, and I don't think I mentioned this before, but mental health care plans give you 10 sessions in a calendar year, whereas eating disorder plans, if you get one, let's say today, next year in April, that's when it would expire. Now, just because you have access to 40, that you might not necessarily need to use all of them, but they are there if you need them. So once you get an eating disorder management plan, alongside the 40 psychology sessions, you can also get 20 sessions rebated by a dietitian. And again, same thing applies. You can choose how often you'd like to come into therapy, and how many of those sessions you use. Another thing to note is GPs usually don't give you access to all 40 all at once. So usually they give 10, and then the psychologist will usually write an update letter to the GP, just letting them know what's overall like your progress, the goals that have been met, and what else needs to be worked on. And then they usually give you another 10 sessions and so on. Um, so the other thing I really want to emphasize, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier, is that you don't need to wait until it gets really bad before seeking support. Early intervention makes a massive difference, and it's it makes it a little bit easier to navigate just day-to-day stresses as well. The other thing I want you guys to keep in mind is that recovery is not linear. It's normal and completely okay to have setbacks when we're trying to repair an unhealthy relationship with food and our bodies that's probably been around for years, if not decades. But it's really about taking small steps towards progress, not perfection. Um, Actually, one other thing I forgot to mention about seeking support is that you can also access support through private health. It will just depend on how much your specific um, private health will cover. That's pretty much it for today. Thank you so much for being here. There is a handout that you can download through Eventbrite. It covers urge surfing, and a couple of other strategies. So it follows a 7-day plan. Um, and you're welcome to use it. You're also welcome to just have it with you. There's no pressure to use it if you're not feeling ready or comfortable. I hope this webinar's given you a little bit more of an idea of what binge eating disorder is, what it isn't, what support options there are, and what treatment might look like, and how you can access that treatment. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Hope that made sense. And thank you so much for coming.